Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back in time not just a century or two, but nearly a millennium into the dim, gritty alleyways of medieval Europe. Imagine this. You're walking through a cobbled street in a cramped little town. The air smells like soot, stale beer, and boiled cabbage. You step carefully to avoid a fresh splash of something unmentionable that just got tossed from an upstairs window. Charming, right? Your mouth feels weirdly dry, and your teeth feel fuzzy. You swipe your tongue across them and recoil at the grit. No minty freshness here. No toothbrush tucked behind your ear like some smug modern maniac. Nope, this is Grimeville, and you're about to live a day in the mouth of the Middle Ages. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this little history rabbit hole travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a row of timber-framed houses. One leans alarmingly to the left. The other looks like it's held together by prayers and centuries of pigeon droppings. Children scamper by, barefoot and loud. They're chewing something, maybe bark, maybe dried plum, maybe a mystery no one wants solved. You pass a tannery. You immediately regret that. Inside one of the small homes, a family prepares dinner. Bread hard as roof tile is being dunked into thin onion soup. The crust will later double as a tooth scrubber. Functional, if not delicious. You settle in a corner like a ghostly observer. The mother rinses her mouth with wine, swishes it round, then swallows it with a sigh. You guess that counts as mouthwash. Historians still argue whether most peasants even cared about oral hygiene. Some believe toothbrushing was considered a luxury, a noble's pastime. Others argue peasants used folk wisdom. Chew this twig, rub with that herb, rinse with salt water, and hope for a divine mercy. But here's the kicker. Despite everything, no floss, no floor mid, no ultrasonic water picks, medieval people didn't always have terrible teeth. Shocking, right? Especially when you're picturing moldy bread crusts and soot for breakfast. But think about it. They didn't eat refined sugar. No cola, no caramel, no midnight trips to the fridge for ice cream. Their diets were brutal, but not cavity-causing. You shift closer to the hearth. The father is carving something with a small knife, probably not sterilized. A sliver of wood, a chewstick. He runs it along his teeth with practiced boredom. His gums are red. His breath probably could fell a deer. But hey, it's effort. A fun little fringe detail. In some villages, people believed a mouth rinsed in the morning with cold beer would protect against tooth ghosts. These weren't literal ghosts, but rather the vague sense of doom associated with molar pain. Toothaches were feared like tiny demons, and in the absence of science, they were treated with chants, charms, and whatever plant your neighbor's cousin swore by. You wander out again, past the local baker. The scent of yeast and wood smoke is thick in the air. You notice him spitting frequently into a bucket beside the oven. Some say medieval folk spat a lot, not just from habit, but because saliva was believed to carry bad humors out of the body. Better out than in, they figured. You pass a pig, which is not as exciting as it sounds. It's wearing a collar, which is more exciting. It squeals at you, then waddles off into the alley where, you can only assume, it rules like a greasy little prince. You rub your own teeth again. Still fuzzy, still no Colgate. There's something charming and horrifying about this world. The people are tough, toothy in a very uneven way, and surprisingly resourceful. When you grow up with no dentist and no painkillers, you learn to improvise. Some even carried toothpicks in their hats. Not the plastic kind. We're talking goose feather shafts or bits of bone, and they used them constantly. sometimes in social settings. Imagine dinner conversation interrupted by your host picking roast duck from his molars with a turkey leg splinter. Good luck keeping your appetite. Of course, not everyone was scraping their gums with bird bones. Some folks, especially in the cities, could afford imported herbs like cloves or cinnamon bark to chew on. Those spicy options served a dual purpose: breath freshener and parasite killer. 2 for 1. Very medieval. You find yourself outside a small chapel now. The bell tolls. Someone inside is probably praying for their cousin's swollen jaw. Toothaches were spiritual crises, you see. People prayed to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dental misery. Her story involves getting all her teeth knocked out. She's still invoked today, in some places, though now with slightly less torture and slightly more novocaine. A tinker passes you by, cart jingling with pots and iron keys. He stops, hooks up something nasty, and grins with a mouth like a crumbling stone fence. For teeth, all survivors. You nod politely. He offers you a sprig of parsley. Good for the stench, he says with a wink. You take it, because frankly, you're desperate. Remember, in this time, oral hygiene isn't about aesthetics. It's about pain prevention and basic survival. A rotting tooth could lead to infection, fever, and death. You probably won't survive this century anyway, but that molar might just speed things up. You dock into an alehouse. It's dim and smoky, filled with the soft roar of tankards and tall tales. A man at the corner table is carving a walnut into a crude denture. Another gnaws at a twig while listening to a lute player sing about heartbreak and hernias. You lean back against the rough wooden beam. Outside, the sun is dipping behind crooked roofs. You breathe in deep, and yep, someone is definitely boiling cabbage again. Your teeth ache in sympathy for a past you never lived. But now, you're in it. You wait till the scratch of straw beneath your back and the unmistakable sensation of morning mouth, but no toothpaste, no sink, no electric hum of a sonica, just the sharp, smoky bite of last night's fireplace clinging to the roof of your mouth like a guilty secret. You sit up, groggy, and spot the peasant woman from last night already at the hearth, muttering something under her breath as she tosses herbs into a pot. Breakfast, maybe, or medicine, or both. Your jaw aches slightly. Was that a dream? Did you sleep funny? Or is this just what it feels like to be a commoner in the Middle Ages, constantly on the edge of inflammation? You watch as the family stirs. The kids are already chewing on something fibrous. Not candy, not cereal. It's more like a root. Probably licorice root or birch bark. Popular in some regions not because it tasted good, but because it scrubbed the teeth while chewing. Welcome to your first lesson in peasant-grade dental care. Chew, spit, repeat. Bread, you quickly learn, is the medieval multi-tool. Last night it softened soup. Today, it's going to clean your teeth. That dry, crusty heel of the loaf hard enough to chip a tooth is chewed deliberately. The coarse texture acts like sandpaper, scraping away last night's meat residue and perhaps even a bit of last week's skillet. Historians still argue whether this cleaning by crust was intentional or just a happy accident born from economic necessity. But one thing's clear. In the absence of dental floss, a brick of stale barley bread is better than nothing. You glance in a cracked piece of metal propped against the wall. It's a mirror, technically. You open your mouth and wince. Your gums are red. Your teeth slightly yellowed but not rotten. Not yet. Your breath, on the other hand, could probably peel paint off the chapel doors. No one comments. Everyone smells like that here. It's part of the background aroma, like wood smoke and boiled onions. One of the children hands you a thin twig. You blink at it, confused. The child demonstrates. He chews on the end until it frays, then scrubs it along his teeth with a sort of absent-minded rhythm. You mimic him. The taste is earthy, bitter, maybe hazelwood or rash. You gag a little, He laughs. This is your chew stick, or miswick in some traditions. Versions of this simple dental tool were used around the world, from medieval England to Islamic lands, where oral hygiene had its own religious significance. In the Christian Middle Ages, hygiene was sometimes frowned upon, linked to vanity. But practicality had its limits. Chew sticks were basic, portable, and reusable, a poor man's toothbrush, endorsed by necessity. Now that you know how to scrape, the question is, what else do you do for oral care? The mother takes a pinch of salt from a small pouch and dissolves it in a cup of tepid ale. She rinses, spits into the hearth, and gestures for you to try. It's like gargling with bacon tears. Not refreshing, but the salt works as an antiseptic. One of those old tricks that actually holds up to modern science. You sit outside to clear your head. A local farmer walks by and stops for a chat. You notice something curious, his smile. He's missing a front tooth, but the rest seem okay. Not dazzling, but strong. He talks about his daily meals, porridge, dried fish, stewed greens. No sugar, that's the secret. No honey, unless it's a festival. No cakes, unless you're a lord. No refined carbs dripping with glaze. Historians still argue whether sugar consumption in medieval Europe was rare or simply underrecorded. Some sources suggest the upper classes had increasing access by the 14th century, especially after the Crusades. But for peasants like this farmer, sugar was as exotic as flying carpets. A quirky detail emerges. In some regions, people used wool to clean their teeth. Not a full washcloth, just a small tuft of sheared wool wrapped round a finger. Dipped in vinegar or ash. Rub vigorously. You try not to picture it. You fail. You pass by the village well and overhear two women trading recipes not for food, but for mouth scrubs. One swears by crushed sage and goose fat. The other prefers soot from burned rosemary mixed with a drop of lamp oil. You nod politely and back away. You're not ready for a lamp oil just yet. Your jaw still aches a little. You rub it instinctively. A nearby boy notices and says, "You got worms." You blink. Worms? Yes, he insists. Toothworms. Little white squirmers that bore holes in your teeth while you sleep. He's seen one. His cousin pulled it out during a toothache. It looked just like a cooked rice grain. You want to laugh, but his sincerity is disarming. This wasn't a joke. People believed in tooth worms for centuries. It was the dominant explanation for cavities well into the 17th century. Of course, what they probably saw was necrotic pulp, or a maggot from infected wounds. But hayworms made more sense to medieval minds. You smile through the horror and keep walking. A nearby craftsman waves you over. He's sharpening a bone tool. When you ask what it's for, he cheerfully says, to clean under the teeth, like a medieval floss pick. The idea of using a bone sliver to scoop debris from your gums is horrifying, but, again, resourceful. A fringe idea, maybe, but likely more common than we think. By midday, your mouth feels a bit cleaner. You've chewed bark, gargled salted beer, and even found a minty herb to chew a sprig of fennel someone handed you as a tooth freshener. It doesn't mask the funk completely, but it's a welcome upgrade from garlic breath roulette. As you sit on a stump watching chickens fight over beetles, you begin to realize something strange. Medieval people weren't gross. They were just doing the best they could with what they had, which, in this case, was twigs, salt, and some very bold culinary choices. You lean against the rough edge of a timber fence as the town's life hums round you, blacksmiths hammering iron, dogs barking at invisible spirits, and a goat trying to climb a staircase for reasons known only to goats. The air is thick with smells, and somewhere in that layered olfactory cake, your own breath is baking a top note. You fiddle with the chew stick still tucked behind your ear. It's now frayed and soft at the end, ready for another round of tooth scraping. But today, you're curious. What if you weren't a peasant? What if you wanted to step up your dental game? You wander into the town market, your feet crunching through a mix of straw, mud, and things best not identified. Amid the stalls selling onions, cured meat, and questionable elixirs, you find a strange little cart with bundles of carved wood sticks laid out like fine jewelry. The vendor grins with 3 good teeth. Toothwood, he announces proudly. Best from the east. The sticks are slimmer than the one you used earlier, and the ends are already frayed, clearly designed for the purpose. These are chew sticks, alright, but fancy ones. Myrrh-coated, some of them. Peppermint if you're lucky. They've been used since ancient Egypt, you recall. Even by royalty, known by many names: Miswick, Arak, Siwak. Still used today in parts of Africa and the Middle East. You select one that smells faintly of cinnamon and start chewing. The fibers work gently against your teeth, not unlike the bristles of a modern toothbrush. No paste needed. Just spit, rinse, repeat. Historians still argue whether these sticks were introduced into medieval Europe via returning crusaders, or whether they evolved independently in multiple regions. Either way, by the High Middle Ages, some form of toothstick had infiltrated multiple layers of society, especially among those who traveled, traded, or prayed a lot. A monk passes by, eyeing your chewing technique. Turn it more. He mutters, let the end bloom like a flower. You comply. He's right. The wood fans out, softens further. It even feels therapeutic, like a tiny massage for your sore molars. You find yourself in conversation with a traveling herbalist. She opens a pouch and lets you smell the contents. Powdered mint, dried orange peel, charcoal from beechwood, and something pungent she only identifies as badger ash. You try not to gag. Mix it with water. Rub with linen. She says, takes the stink out and the black off. She pats her own teeth with pride. A few are missing, but the survivors look surprisingly white. You buy a small sample and stuff it in your pouch, unsure if you're going to use it or build a small scarecrow from it. In a quiet corner near the baker's stall, you watch a woman dip a bundle of horsehair tied round a twig into a bowl of vinegar. Then, she drags it along her front teeth with a practiced motion. For Sundays, she tells you, as if it were her version of church makeup. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some medieval texts suggest people even used feathers, porcupine quills, or the fibrous parts of nettle stems to clean between teeth. Nature was the supermarket, and everything was an aisle. And then there's ash. You can't escape it. Soot and ash were the baking soda of their day. Some used ash from burned rosemary or thyme, smoky and aromatic. Others used plain firewood ash mixed with a touch of honey or lard to make a kind of grimy, gritty paste. Did it work? Possibly. Was it comfortable? Not a chance. You find an old man in the square tapping his gums with a polished twig. He swears by ash mixed with salt and a good spit of chicken fat. He grins proudly and offers a whiff. You decline, politely, sort of. Despite the strange methods, you're starting to notice something. Almost all these people have some kind of routine. It may be rooted in folklore or half-remembered herbalism, but it's consistent. Chew, scrape, rinse, repeat. Maybe not every day, maybe not with sterile tools, but there's a logic to it. And here's where it gets more interesting. In certain towns, wealthier folks carried personalized tooth cleaning kits. Little pouches with silver toothpicks, engraved tongue scrapers, even tiny cloths soaked in mint oil. Think of them as medieval dental travel sets, part fashion statement, part functional necessity. You'd whip it out at a banquet and politely clean your teeth after the roasted duck leg, all while trying not to look like you were performing surgery. Historians still debate whether these kits were for hygiene or simply a display of wealth. After all, when you're rich, even your bad habits can be accessorized. You walk toward the edge of town now, past the thatched cottages and the fields dotted with sheep. The sky is a soft gray, and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. You chew thoughtfully on your cinnamon-scented stick. It's not glamorous, but your teeth feel decent. Your fingers trace along your gums, noticing the lack of bleeding. Progress. For a moment, you feel a little proud. Then you step in something unholy and the moment is gone. Back in the village square, a boy sells bunches of mint tied with twine. For breath, he says. For luck, his sister adds. You buy one. Why not? You chew on the mint and close your eyes, letting the cool sharpness cut through the woolly fog of your tongue. No flormid, no floss, just wood, salt, soot, and persistence. But somehow, you're starting to get used to it. Your feet crunch over gravel as you follow a narrow path toward the town's outer edge. The houses here are smaller, more weather-beaten, and sit like tired shoulders against the land. You pass a low shed where someone is boiling water over a fire steam, and the scent of crushed herbs float lazily in the air. You pause, inhale deeply, and catch notes of sage, thyme, and what might be old cabbage. Less exciting, the woman tending the pot glances up and waves you closer. She's stirring a dark mixture that clings to the ladle like gritty oatmeal. Tooth scrub, she explains. For the feast tomorrow. Can't have bad breath when the eels come out. She says this without irony. And now you're haunted by the phrase when the eels come out. She shows you the paste made of sage ash, charcoal, a pinch of salt, and this is key a few drops of vinegar boiled with mint leaves. You dip your finger in and rub a dab across your teeth. It's gritty, salty, and sharp like brushing with sand and regret. But strangely effective. Your teeth feel cleaner. Your mouth burns slightly. But hey, so does modern mouthwash. Just without the vinegar and emotional damage. You thank her and continue down the path, still working the flavor out of your gums. The world is brighter now. Or maybe it's just that you're no longer seeing it through a fog of halitosis. Historians still argue whether this kind of homemade dental paste was common across Europe or mostly practiced in rural pockets with strong herbal traditions. Some believe recipes like this were passed down orally, tied to local customs and seasonal plans. Others suggest these were luxury habits, quaint but rare. Either way, you've got a mouthful of sage-flavored sand and a deeper respect for herbalist grannies. As you pass a row of sun-bleached fencing, you see another curious ritual. A young girl is brushing her teeth with a feather well. Not so much brushing as poking. She dips the feather's quill in a mixture of honey and crushed mint, then drags it gently across her gums. It's less like cleaning and more like coaxing demons out with dessert. You ask her why. She shrugs. Mama says mint and honey make the bad spirits go away. You're not sure if she means gingivitis or actual demons, but either way, she's committed. It's not the only odd technique you encounter today. A few cottages down, a farmer shows you his family cure. A linen cloth dipped in goat milk and rubbed vigorously across the teeth while reciting a specific psalm. He claims it keeps the teeth white and the soul clean. You try it. It doesn't do much for your enamel, but it's oddly calming. Like brushing your teeth with a prayer and a splash of dairy. Fringe, absolutely. But in a world without Listerine, you take what you can get. You stop for water at a nearby well, where a group of women are gossiping between bucket hauls. One of them mentions a widow who still uses ground oyster shell to scrub her molars, an idea she got from her time in the port city. Apparently, it leaves teeth bright but bleeding. That seems to sum up a lot of medieval dental advice. Shiny, at great cost. You wander into the town's small church as the bells begin to chime. Inside, it's cool and dark. They are laced with incense and candle wax. A monk is sweeping the floor. You strike up a conversation. He tells you that the abbey keeps old herbal texts that mention tooth powders made with burnt rosemary, fennel seeds, and even chalk. Chalk, you ask. He nods. Pulverized, mixed with mint oil and parsley juice. It sounds like the smoothie from hell, but you write it down in your mental notebook of medieval oral care atrocities. To your surprise, he reaches into a pouch and pulls out a tiny scroll. He unfurls it carefully, revealing a list of herbal combinations. This one here, he says, pointing, was for those who had unwholesome humors collecting in the mouth. In other words, someone with truly catastrophic breath. You marvel at the intention behind it. These weren't just random guesses. They were remedies built from observation, trial and error, and a bit of faith. Sure, science hadn't arrived yet, but the desire to not smell like a dying badger was strong. On your way out, you pass a small apothecary's window. Inside is a shelf with glass jars powdered cinnamon, dried cloves, sage-ash, salt, soot, and crushed rose petals. The owner waves you in and offers a sample paste. It smells almost pleasant. She explains that nobles occasionally ordered tooth-scrubbing kits scented with perfume. The point wasn't just cleanliness, it was status. Mint breath meant money. Clove-scented gums, a date with someone important. Historians still debate the extent to which nobles engaged in personal hygiene rituals, or if they simply masked smells with perfume and powdered wigs. But enough records survive to show that at least some took their teeth seriously, especially when courting or hosting foreign visitors. Outside, you chew again on a fennel stalk, watching the sky darken into late afternoon. Your teeth, you notice, are not exactly gleaming, but they feel smoother, less like sandpaper and more like old wood. Progress. You remember a fun little detail you overheard earlier. In some Italian towns, people rubbed their teeth with burnt bread, just blackened toast, ground into dust. You almost laugh. Bread cleans your teeth before and after you eat. No part of the meal gets wasted, and neither, it seems, does the soot. You pass a man sleeping under a wagon with a feather sticking from his mouth. Either he passed out mid-clean, or there's a pigeon somewhere feeling violated. The last sun rays hit the town's rooftops, and for a moment, the smell of herbs, smoke, and warm stone feels timeless. You've scrubbed with twigs, feathers, sage, salt, vinegar, mint, and probably mild trauma. And somehow, your teeth are still in your head. For now, evening falls like a woolen blanket, soft and scratchy and full of old smells. You follow the flicker of torches toward the town center, where music drifts from the alehouse and voices bounce off the timbered walls like thrown dice. You're weary. Your jaw tender from too much medieval innovation. But you're not done yet. Tonight, you are going to see the dentist. Not the white-coated, chairside, open-wide kind. No, this is the Middle Ages. Tonight's dental professional is your local barber surgeon, a man who sharpens razors, trims beards, sets bones, and pulls teeth with all the tenderness of a hungry bear arranging a picnic basket. You duck under a swinging sign painted with a striped pole and the faint outline of a tooth with legs, possibly meant as a joke, possibly literal. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke and something antiseptic, like boiled wine. The barber is a jolly man with a red apron and very clean hands, considering he's just stitched someone's scalp. He sees you and grins. Tooth trouble, he asks, before you can even sit. You admit you're here to observe, not that you dare say no if he decided to extract something for fun. He ushers you toward a stool near the window. A man is already seated there, gripping the arms of the chair like he's bracing for impact. The barber picks up an iron instrument, part pliers, part hook, all nightmare, and begins to hum. The patient sweats. You do too, with a practiced twist and an alarming crunch. The barber frees a molar the size of a raisin. The man howls, then gulps wine from a nearby cup and groans in something that might be gratitude. The tooth lands in a bowl with a clink. The barber turns to you, cheerful. Would you like to see the infected root? You politely decline and study the floorboards instead. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons were truly trained in dentistry or simply enthusiastic amateurs with strong wrists and iron stomachs. In larger towns, some did specialize, but out in the countryside, if you could sharpen scissors, you could pull a tooth. Whether or not you should was another matter. For a toothache that didn't require pulling, you'd be offered a range of solutions. A rinse made of burnt alum and vinegar, a poultice of mashed garlic and onion. Or, if you were really desperate, you might be instructed to bite a frog. Because frogs, according to some folk healers, could suck the pain from your jaw and hop away with it. Nature's tiny green anesthesiologists. You step back outside and take a long breath. It smells like wood smoke, wet leather, and cooked meat. Somewhere behind you, the barber starts singing. You suspect he's slightly drunk, but his patients seem to like him. A rare quality in a tooth yanker. You pass a young woman clutching her jaw. Her friend ties a cloth round her head, one of those classic toothache wraps that make you look like you're trying to smuggle fruit in your cheeks. The cloth's been soaked in clove oil and vinegar. She winces but nods. Clove oil, you remember, has real anesthetic properties. Still used today. The Middle Ages weren't all superstition. Sometimes they got it right. You stop by the apothecary again. Curious. The woman inside greets you with a tired smile and shows you her dental section. It's a shelf containing dried mint, salt, ash, cloves, sage, and vials labeled dragon root and blessed oil. You ask what dragon root is. She shrugs. Probably horseradish. She opens a dusty book and reads an old recipe aloud. For rot of tooth, take soot of chimney, mix with honey and strong wine, and rub thrice daily with silver spoon. You both pause, you both laugh, but you also both knew someone, somewhere, probably tried it. By now, your teeth feel less like a health hazard and more like survivors. You haven't had sugar in days. You scrubbed with a tree branch. You've rinsed with beer, chewed on sage, and learned far more about frog biting than you ever intended. And just when you think the day is winding down, a boy runs past shouting, "The monk's scroll is out." You follow the crowd gathering by a traveling monk near the town square. He's unrolling a parchment with sketches of herbs and Latin notes. It's a medical scroll, worn at the edges and smelling faintly of mildew. He's pointing to a drawing of a tooth with worm-like lines near the root. The vermis dentarius, he announces, dwells in the shadowed hollows of the mouth. Tooth worms again. The crowd listens in horror and fascination as he lists remedies. Some are based on real herbal effects: lavender oil for swelling, cinnamon for inflammation. Others are, let's say, experimental. One recipe calls for grinding emeralds and mixing them with vinegar. For noble teeth, the monk adds. You don't ask how many noblemen choked on emerald grit before this fell out of fashion. Historians still debate whether these scrolls were widely circulated or guarded closely by monastic scribes. Some believe only a handful survived. Others that they were copied and traded like folk songs. Either way, their blend of folklore, real herbal wisdom, and pure guesswork offers a fascinating look into medieval mouths. As the monk rolls up his scroll, you realize something profound. Oral hygiene in the Middle Ages wasn't just about teeth. It was about health, identity, religion, and fear. The mouth was where sin entered, prayers exited, and pain resided. Cleaning it, however, crudely wasn't vanity. It was survival. You return to your borrowed straw mat, mouth tingling faintly from all the day's experimentation. The sky is black, the stars sharp, and somewhere, a lute plays a soft, off-key melody. Your molars throb quietly, but your soul feels oddly full. You wake up to church bells and a rooster who clearly believes in alarm clocks. The straw under your blanket rustles as you sit up, rubbing your eyes and working your jaw. Your teeth are sore, not painful, but saw like they've been on an unexpected medieval spa retreat run by amateur blacksmiths and herbalists. Today, you're curious about something else entirely. If commoners used chew sticks and barbers played dentist with iron hooks, what did the wealthy do? What about the nobility, the powdered, perfumed elite tucked away in their high towers with imported spices and servants who probably brushed through them? You walk up the winding hill toward the local manor house, a two-story timber structure with thick shutters and an ivy-covered entryway. It's not a castle, but it's as close to nobility as this town gets. A servant eyes you suspiciously, but you're waved in after muttering something about herbal remedies and monk scrolls. Inside, the contrast is immediate. Tapestries on the walls, rushes on the floor scented with lavender, and actual glass windows. Everything smells better. Not great, but better. You're led to the solar bright upstairs room where the lady of the house reclines near the window. She's holding a small cloth wrapped round what appears to be cloves, gently chewing them like candy. She notices your stare and smiles, revealing a surprisingly intact row of teeth. Cloves, she says, to sweeten the breath and numb the gums. She waves you over and shows you her collection: a silver toothpick, an ivory tongue scraper, and a tiny comb with a stiff bristle, perhaps an early form of a toothbrush, or at least a tooth massager. Historians still argue whether these noble hygiene kits were everyday items or used only for a ceremony. Some scholars suggest they were status symbols, objects to display rather than use. Others believe they were practical, especially in courtship and diplomacy. After all, no one wants to negotiate with a man whose teeth smell like dried eel stew. A maid enters, carrying a bowl of wine infused with rosemary and sage. The lady swishes it round her mouth, then delicately spits into a small ceramic pot. This is mouth rinsing as performance. You realize that even oral hygiene has social classes. And here's a fringe detail. Some noble women reportedly rinsed with rose water or orange blossom water, not for cleanliness, but to leave a pleasant scent when they spoke. Oral hygiene is aromatherapy. The breath wasn't just neutralized, it was weaponized. The lord of the manor enters next, grumbling about a sore molar. He holds a handkerchief to his cheek, and his breath smells like mint and wine. He grumbles about sending for the London man to look at it. You realize he means a traveling dental specialist, rare and expensive, usually found in cities, sometimes attached to apothecaries or universities. That's right, universities. By the late Middle Ages, dentistry was starting to become its own field. Slowly, painfully, you excuse yourself and explore the manor's garden. A gardener shows you the herb patch: fennel, sage, mint, thyme, and something he calls tooth thistle. You ask what that is. He grins. It hurts going in but helps when it's out. You don't inquire further. He explains that rich households often grew herbs for both flavor and function. Sage wasn't just for stuffing birds, it was for rubbing on gums. Fennel helped with digestion and breath. Mint, that was the medieval equivalent of chewing gum. Tuck a sprig behind your ear, and you were ready for polite company. Back inside, the servant shows you a linen pouch containing powdered mixtures, crushed myrrh, ground rosemary, a little bit of salt, and yes, more ash. You're beginning to suspect everyone in this century has a personal relationship with fire residue. This particular mixture, you're told, is applied to the teeth with a damp linen cloth. Once a week if the weather's nice. You don't want to open the mouth too much in winter, the servant explains. It invites the demons in, not cavities. Demons, priorities. Historians still debate how widespread these upper-class routines were. Some nobles embraced them with zeal. Others couldn't be bothered. Royal records mention dental powders, perfumed mouth cloths, and even imported sticks from Asia for a tooth cleaning. But there's also plenty of evidence of monarchs with truly appalling dental decay, so it's safe to say enthusiasm varied. Before you leave, The lady of the house gifts you a tiny sachet of dried clove and sage. "You're more pleasant company than most," she says. You're touched, until you remember you haven't spoken a word aloud all day. Must be the freshened breath. Outside, you walk along the wall of the manor, chewing one of the cloves. It burns slightly but numbs your tongue in a way that feels advanced. Medicinal. You've come a long way from vinegar and salt slurries and ale mugs. You pass a merchant unloading crates of spices from a wagon. Cinnamon, cardamom, even a little nutmeg. These aren't just for food. They're for the body, for the mouth, for those who can afford them. In medieval Europe, the spice trade wasn't just about flavor, it was about health, luxury, and sometimes oral hygiene. You think back to that noble woman's silver toothpick. Delicate, ornate, probably never cleaned, but used and admired. You remember her smile, not flawless, but confident. Because here, in the world of lords and ladies, it's not about keeping all your teeth. It's about making the ones you do have smell like roses. You return to your peasant quarters, still chewing your clove, feeling oddly regal. And just before bed, you reach for your not rusty chew stick, chew the end soft, and run it over your teeth with practiced rhythm. Somewhere deep in the middle of the dark ages, your smile just got a little bit shinier. The morning sun filters through a cracked shutter, lighting up the dust motes like golden ghosts. You sit up, stretch your arms, and run your tongue across your teeth, rough but not revolting. A small victory in a world where dental hygiene is part habit, part ritual, and part act of medieval courage. Today, your thoughts drift to something less luxurious, the noble powders and silver toothpicks. What happens when things go wrong? When your gums swell, your molar aches, and no clove in the world can stop the pulsing in your jaw. Welcome to the darker side of medieval mouths, the land of decay, infection, divine punishment. You overhear a conversation in the street between two older women. One clutches her cheek, eyes red from crying. The other tuts sympathetically and whispers something about God's judgment. You follow discreetly as they enter a tiny chapel where a priest stands by with a well-worn expression. The afflicted woman kneels, murmurs a prayer, and then accepts a bit of holy water dabbed on her lips. Her toothache, it seems, is more than just physical. It's spiritual. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed tooth pain was divine punishment, or whether that was just the convenient explanation when nothing else made sense. What's certain is that many diseases, including dental decay, were seen as manifestations of sin. You lie, you lust, you forget to tithe, and your canine rebels in protest. A fringe belief held that each tooth corresponded to a specific sin. Lose a molar must have been gluttony. Front incisor gone. That's pride, my friend. While this wasn't standard across Europe, records from some monasteries show attempts to map dental pain to moral failure. A holy chart of bad behavior, etched right into your gums. You wander into the apothecary again, hoping for answers or at least some vinegar that doesn't smell like regret. She shows you her pain shelf. It's less comforting than it sounds. There's dried henbane for numbing, but also known to cause hallucinations. Crushed poppy seeds, opium's sleepy cousin, mixed into a mash for a topical relief. And a mysterious red paste made from boiled root and wine, applied with a cloth and a warning: don't swallow. She tells you about another local remedy: heated bricks wrapped in cloth, held against the cheek to pull out the poison. A version of this idea still exists today in hot compresses, though hopefully with less brick. One page of her medical ledger shows something curious, a recipe labeled simply the bitter cleanse. It includes vinegar, salt, ash, and wait for it, children. Yours or someone else's. It doesn't specify. You set the book down gently and back away. Outside, you meet a farmer who tells you his brother died last year from a toothache. You blink. He nods solemnly. Started with pain, then fever. Then his face swelled like a gallbladder. Priest came too late, you shudder, because as grotesque as it sounds, it's historically accurate. Dental infections left untreated could and did kill. Abscesses turned septic, jawbones rotted, pain spread to the ears, the eyes. There was no penicillin, no draining tools, no clean gauze. If it spread, it spread. And you prayed, or you drank yourself into unconsciousness and hoped your body won the fight. You pass a man selling cures in little corked vials. He claims his tonic will chase the worms, calm the humors, and freshen the breath like mountain wind. You ask what's in it. He gives you a wink and changes the subject. A woman nearby rolls her eyes. That's goat urine and wine vinegar, she mutters. He's been selling it since the bishop got toothache and swore by it. So yes, goat urine. Again, you're sensing a theme. You decide to consult the barber surgeon once more. He's cleaning his tools, bloody hooks, bone pliers, and something that looks like a meat skewer. You ask what he does for rot that's deep in the gum. He shrugs. Pull it. If it's black, cut the gum and dig it out. If it bleeds, good. If not, pray. You ask what he does for patients who refuse. He shows you a small wooden block. For biting, he says, to stop them from chewing off their own tongue. You leave with a very sudden and intense appreciation for modern anesthesia. And then, because it's never dull in the medieval mouth, you're invited to a festival of Saint Apollonia, patron saint of dental pain. You can't make this up. The village gathers in the square. There's music, bread, a small play reenacting the moment Apollonia had her teeth knocked out by Roman soldiers. Everyone claps. A few people hold up carved wooden teeth like offerings. It's part theater, part therapy, and strangely moving. You talk to a local priest afterward, who tells you that praying to Apollonia during a toothache is still practiced in some regions. She understands, he says, tapping his own crooked smile. Historians agree that the cult of Saint Apollonia gained popularity as dental pain became a more recognized and feared affliction. Her imagery appears in church carvings, old manuscripts, and even amulets worn around the neck, not for luck, but for protection. From pain, from loss, from the slow decay of the self, one molar at a time. You chew a mint leaf thoughtfully. The ache in your own mouth has dulled to a throb. You think of the woman at the chapel, the brick compressors, the crushed emerald powder for the wealthy, and the frog-biting peasant in the next town over. So many answers to one problem. So many stories in every smile or the lack of one. And you realize, in the Middle Ages, having all your teeth wasn't just luck. It was a miracle. The sun is high overhead as you leave the town square behind, your feet crunching over uneven stone and dirt. Your jaw still carries a dull, lived-in ache like a medieval souvenir. You chew thoughtfully on a fennel seed from your pouch, the licorice-like taste filling your mouth with its strange herbal sweetness. You've explored the peasant's toolkit, the noble's perfumed routines, and the horror show that was medieval tooth extraction. But now, it's time to talk about something even stranger. Brace yourself for the early history of false teeth. Yes, you heard that right. False teeth. You make your way to a cottage near the edge of town. Inside lives a man with a reputation not for healing or sermons, but for crafting things that go in the mouth. His house smells of boiled horse glue and lavender, not a comforting mix. He greets you with a gummy grin and invites you to sit by his small wooden workbench. There, laid out neatly, are several items, bits of ivory, carved wood, metal wire, and yet a row of human teeth strung together like an eerie bracelet. You don't ask where they came from. He begins to explain, proudly, that these are replacement teeth, made for those who've lost their own, mostly front ones. He says, for appearances, not for chewing. No one chews with teeth they bought. This is your introduction to medieval dental prosthetics. functional, barely, fashionable, occasionally, expensive, incredibly, and guess what if you were truly wealthy? You didn't just replace your teeth. You replaced them with other people's teeth. That's right. It was common to take teeth from cadavers, especially the recently dead, and so wire them into your gums. Sometimes human teeth, sometimes animal bone, sometimes carved ivory shaped to resemble human incisors, which, spoiler alert, didn't fool anyone. Historians still argue whether these replacements were used widely or were rare novelties restricted to courts and cities. Most evidence suggests these were more for looks than for function. Smiling at a banquet, yes. Biting into roasted boar, not a chance. The man at the bench shows you one of his more modern designs, a hinged wooden base, lined with wire, into which carved teeth are affixed. It resembles something between a bear trap and a very tiny puppet. These are for the market women, he explains. Helps them smile at buyers. You suppress a shudder. Then he brings out the strange stuff. Gold fillings, not for utility, purely decorative. A noble might pay a craftsman to fill visible cavities with thin sheets of gold. Not because it helped with pain, but because it gleamed when you laughed. Nothing says I'm rich like smiling with treasure in your face. A fringe note here. Some merchants in Eastern Europe experimented with lead-based tooth inlays. Lead in your mouth. You grimace at the thought. But apparently, the dull gray sheen was considered refined. At least until everyone started dying mysteriously. As you leave the denture maker's home, you pass a teenage boy who grins widely, revealing a set of irregularly spaced but unnaturally white teeth. He tells you his uncle filed them smooth and rubbed them daily with salt, chalk, and blessed milk. Don't eat with them, he says proudly. Just show them to girls. That about sums up medieval dental prosthetics. More pageantry than practicality. Back in the village square, an old woman pulls you aside and mutters about her tooth beads. She shows you a necklace strung with the teeth of deceased relatives, each one polished, sacred. She touches one gently. This one was my sister's. She never lost a tooth in her life, buried with every single one. It's a little unsettling, but also oddly sweet. In some places, teeth weren't just for chewing or smiling, they were memory, status, and even magic. You recall reading about charms made from baby teeth, or spells that involved burying a lost mole under the hearth to prevent further decay. Others believed you had to toss a lost tooth over your roof while chanting a rhyme. It wasn't just folklore, it was preventative care. For your next tooth, historians still debate whether such rituals were based on older pagan beliefs or evolved from local superstitions. But they were persistent. Across regions, languages, and class divides, people feared losing teeth and hoped to trick fate into letting them keep the rest. You take a seat beneath a tree, watching children chase chickens and old men chew roots. You spot a merchant dusting his tongue with a cloth soaked in rose oil. Another uses a twig to clean under his nails, then his teeth, in that order. You look away, and just when you think you've seen it all, a man walks by wearing what appears to be a mouth guard made from tortoiseshell. Decorative, useless, but striking. Oral fashion, you suppose. It reminds you that in medieval Europe, teeth weren't just a biological detail. They were social markers. Rotten teeth meant you were poor. Missing teeth meant you'd lived hard. Gold teeth meant you'd bribed fate and your dentist. You return to your temporary lodgings with your jaw humming and your head full of bone and superstition. You pull out your chew stick, now worn smooth, and glance at your reflection in a polished copper basin. Not a dazzling smile, but not bad, all things considered. You think about all the mouths that came before yours, filled with ash, packed with sage, rinsed with wine, strapped with wire and prayer. You think about the woman who wore her sister's tooth like a blessing, the man who couldn't eat with his false teeth but still grinned like a noble. And you smile, because your teeth are real, mostly clean, and blessedly yours. You wake to the smell of fresh bread, and a neighbor coughing up what sounds like his entire past. Charming, the sky is grey, the chicken's louder than usual, and you swear your molars have aged another decade overnight. But today, you are not just chasing hygiene, you're chasing romance. Because as odd as it sounds, teeth and love went hand in hand in the Middle Ages. Or perhaps more accurately, love often leaned heavily on the breath, and that meant a clean mouth, or at least one that didn't offend at first exhale. You step into the village square, where a small crowd is gathering. There's a matchmaker present, seated beneath a linen canopy, surrounded by hopeful young men and women clutching bundles of herbs, ribbons, and in one case, a live chicken. Offerings, presumably not hygiene tools, though at this point, you wouldn't be surprised if the chicken played a role. One of the young men adjusts his tunic and takes a huge bite out of a fennel bowl. Not because he's hungry, but because he wants to smell decent when he talks. You catch the edge of his muttering. She's got a full set, I swear. He isn't talking about furniture. Teeth, it turns out, were a critical part of courtship. A full, healthy smile wasn't just attractive, it was practical. If your potential partner had teeth, they could eat. If they could eat, they were strong. And if they were strong, they could survive childbirth, harvests, and small plagues. Romance, medieval edition. You watch as a girl smiles demurely at a boy revealing only to front teeth. The rest, gone or hidden. But it doesn't seem to matter. He's got 3, and they're clean. It's a match made in molar heaven. Historians still argue whether visible teeth were considered beautiful in the same way they are today. Some paintings from the period suggest that closed-lip smiles were preferred among women of rank, perhaps to hide dental imperfections. Others show full smiles, especially among peasants and children, suggesting joy that defied cosmetic ideals. In certain cultures, a smile showing too many teeth was even seen as vulgar. And if your teeth were blackened from rot or age, it was polite to cover your mouth while speaking. So modesty played its part in dental display. Now, for a fringe gem. In some Eastern European villages, there are stories of brides receiving tooth powder as part of their dowry, tiny pouches of dried mint, sage, or crushed pearl if you were absurdly rich. Not because it was expected that women would scrub religiously, but because fresh breath was considered a lucky charm on the wedding night. You meander toward the tavern where a bard is singing a love ballad that rhymes kiss with miss and bliss with gums like this. It's not subtle, and you suddenly realize that this medieval flirtation has its own rules, most of them involving the mouth. You overhear a barmaid telling a guest, "He tried to woo me with wormwood tea. Said it cleared the breath and darkened the hair. Told him it might clear me if he didn't stop breathing in my direction." She laughs. She's missing a molar, but somehow it suits her to freshen their breath before courtship. Some would chew parsley, clove, or even bits of cinnamon bark. Others would rinse with wine infused with cardamom. And then there were the unlucky ones, who simply drank enough ale to believe their breath was no longer a problem. You pass a middle-aged couple arguing gently about a shared tooth. No, really. The husband had lost a front one and had borrowed one of her false teeth carved from bone. She wants it back. He claims it's his courtship tooth and he needs it tonight. You walk on before the story gets any weirder. At the far edge of the market, a traveling vendor is selling what he calls lover's powder. The ingredients are vague, but the smell is overpowering sweet, herbal, with a hint of ash. He claims it will make your mouth as sweet as a royal garden and your kiss as safe as summer rain. A bold claim for a man with 3 blackened teeth, but people buy it. Love, after all, is hope in a bottle. You sit beneath a tree with your now customary chew stick, gently massaging your teeth and watching the town flirt. A girl hands a boy a ribbon. He offers her a clove. Somewhere, Someone's losing a tooth. But tonight, it doesn't matter. You remember reading that in some Italian courts, romantic letters would include bits of clove or mint to signal both affection and, hopefully, good hygiene. Some were even perfumed with rose oil or crushed sage, an olfactory footnote to go with declarations of love. You also recall a rather amusing account from a 15th century diary describing a noblewoman who refused a suitor after he opened his mouth to laugh and revealed a gold tooth set crookedly into swollen gums. The man was rich but not hygienic. She married his brother instead. Breath, teeth, and toenet all mattered. And yet, for the truly wealthy, hygiene could be optional. Power trumped halitosis if you owned land and wore silk. No one cared if you smelled like boiled turnips and despair. But for the rest, your teeth were part of the package. You lie back, watching the sky dim. Somewhere, a lute plays again. Two figures walk by, arms touching lightly. You hear one say, "You don't stink tonight." The other beams, and that, you realize, might be the medieval version of "You look beautiful." Love in the Middle Ages was many things. Complicated, dangerous, poetic, but sometimes it was just a fresh sprig of mint and a smile with most of your teeth intact. The sky shifts toward dusk again, soft purple bleeding into slate blue as you wander back toward the heart of the village. There's a cool breeze now, carrying with it the smell of roasting meat, freshly upturned earth, and something a bit less appealing that wafts from a nearby ditch. You try not to inhale too deeply. Your jaw twinges slightly as you chew your nightly sprig of mint, a ritual now so automatic that you hardly notice the bitterness. Tonight, though, the wind carries a new whisper, one that makes you pause mid-chew. Worms, someone mutters from behind a stall. You turn, curiosity piqued. A group has gathered near the edge of the town square, surrounding a small wooden stage where a traveling healer is setting up jars and scrolls. He holds a carved pointer in one hand and gestures dramatically toward a large painted diagram of a human mouth complete with exaggerated, crooked teeth and something squiggly writhing inside them. Toothworms, he declares solemnly, the scourge of the skull, the servants of your suffering. The crowd gasps in unified horror, like he's just declared the arrival of an invisible dragon. You push forward to get a closer look, because this is prime medieval science. The man pulls out a jar and rattles something inside a small, rice-like object preserved in wine. One was pulled from a knight's moolah last week, he proclaims, still wriggling when it came free. He holds it up and winks. Historians still argue whether toothworms were metaphorical, spiritual, or simply a misinterpretation of pus and tissue. But for centuries, the idea gripped Europe's collective imagination. Pain in the mouth, clearly. A worm had burrowed in, laid eggs, and was nibbling away while you slept. And while that sounds absurd to modern ears, remember, they had no microscopes, no knowledge of bacteria, no dental x-rays. If something hurt and festered, it must be alive. A living invader, a literal evil squatter in your gum line. The healer now demonstrates a cure. He dips a stick in hot oil, inserts it into a carved wooden tooth model, then taps the side dramatically. It drives the worm out. He shouts, "It cannot stand the heat." The crowd murmurs in awe, and a woman nearby nods. "My uncle did that once," she says. Screamed for an hour, but he said the worm left by morning. You quietly note that the worm might have been his sanity departing via molar. You slip away from the stage as the healer begins selling anti-worm powder, which smells suspiciously like dried parsley and chimney soot. At a nearby tavern, you find an older man swirling ale in a wooden mug. He's missing several teeth, but happy to talk. Toothworms, he mutters, are just what the pain wants you to believe. He winks, toothless. Truth is, you get bad teeth from kissing girls who eat onions. A fringe belief, perhaps, but not unique. In some regions, people believed tooth decay could be transmitted through kisses, bad dreams, or even jealousy. One 14th century manuscript warned that sleeping near someone with a toothache could cause your own teeth to ache by morning. Dental sympathy pains, if you will. You sit beside the man and listen to his tales. One involves a woman who claimed she could see the worms crawling beneath your gums by moonlight. Another about a priest who exorcised a molar with holy water and singing. Both stories end with the same note: the pain went away. Eventually, which, in many cases, was the real truth. The pain did fade, whether from abscess rupture, the nerve dying, or the patient succumbing to fever. In medieval logic, if the pain left, the worm did too. Science was in the experience, not the evidence. You walk back into the night, passing a young girl brushing her teeth with sage leaves and muttering something under her breath, likely a warding spell, or a bedtime rhyme. In this world, they were often the same thing. You remember reading how some cultures believed in protective chants while cleaning their teeth, short prayers to keep decay away, or to bless the teeth you hadn't lost yet. The mouth was a portal, after all, a gateway to both nourishment and sin, laughter and lies. As you round the chapel corner, you find a small alcove where villagers have lit candles before a carving of Saint Apollonia. Her stone figure clutches a pair of pincers. One candle flickers beside a small offering, a tooth laid delicately on a cloth. You feel a strange tenderness, like you've walked in on someone's whispered wish. Toothworms weren't just superstition. They were stories, an attempt to explain suffering, to make it visible. Because if pain had a name, a shape, a tiny white body, then maybe it could be bargained with, driven out. Or you sit at the edge of the square, chew gently on your stick, and wonder, what if all our modern diagnoses, plaque, cavities, root canals, will one day seem as quaint and oddly poetic as worm cures do to us now? Maybe pain always needs a metaphor, and in the Middle Ages, the worm was enough. The moon rises slowly, casting everything in a soft silver glow. You roll your tongue along your teeth, grateful that none are wriggling or whispering. And as the last jar of worm tonic is sold, you smile quietly to yourself. No matter the century, a good story always helps the medicine go down. You wake to the sound of church bells again and the gentle creak of the wind against old wooden shutters. Another day in medieval paradise. Your jaw no longer aches, but your mouth feels unsettled, like it's asking, what are we putting in here today? Ash, vinegar, or experimental tree bark? You swing your legs off the straw bed and stretch. But today's mission isn't about cleaning or soothing. It's about faith. You step outside and walk toward the monastery on the hill, where the rising sun spills gold over ancient stone walls and robed figures move like shadows across the courtyard. If anyone understands how mouth and meaning intertwine, it's the monks. Monastic life in the Middle Ages was orderly, precise, and, to modern sensibilities, quietly brutal. Hours were divided by bells, days by prayers, and speech was rationed. Many monks took vows of silence or practiced custody of the mouth, a kind of spiritual muscle. If you're not careful, your words lead to gossip. And where there's gossip, there's sin. There's to say nothing at all. Inside the scriptorium, a monk invites you to observe. You watch him carefully dip a quill into ink and begin copying a text, an herbal manual with illustrations of plants, teeth, and gums. You point at one image, a molar, drawn with jagged red lines and what looks suspiciously like fire. He nods. Pain of the mouth is like pain of the soul, it purifies. You think he's being metaphorical. You hope he's being metaphorical. Historians still argue whether monks had superior dental health due to their access to herbs, their minimal sugar intake, or divine luck. But archaeological studies have shown that some monasteries kept remarkable records of remedies, clove poultices, sage rinses, even precise recipes for tooth powders that included ground oyster shell and dried fennel. You ask if he uses such things. He shrugs, sometimes, but suffering is also prayer. A fringe belief common in some religious communities held that toothache was a form of penance, a chance to experience Christ's suffering in miniature. So some monks refused relief, offering their pain to God. Others secretly chewed mint behind the cloisters. In the monastery's garden, a younger monk leads you past rows of medicinal herbs. He points out rosemary, thyme, and horehound used not only for digestion and colds but for rinsing the mouth. He crushes a leaf between his fingers and holds it under your nose. This one is best after confession. He whispers, almost mischievously, cleanses more than breath. You wonder if he means that literally or spiritually. The line is thin here. In the refectory, the monks eat in silence. A bowl of broth, a hunk of bread, a few wilted greens. No sugar, no rich sauces, no sticky, tooth-coating desserts. Their diets, though bland, are ideal for dental health. No rot, no decay, just the slow grind of coarse food and contemplation. One monk shows you his personal hygiene kit, a leather pouch containing a small twig, a cloth, and a string of beads. You ask about the beads. They are not for prayer, he says. They're to keep me from grinding my teeth during sermons. You stifle a laugh. Some orders, like the Benedictines, maintained strict routines that included physical cleanliness, even if modesty was paramount. They cleaned their teeth as they did everything else, in silence, with humility, and often communally. Not a spa day, more like synchronized chewing and rinsing. You ask whether the church ever discouraged tooth care. The answer, yes and no. Cleanliness was good, but vanity was not. If you cared too much about your appearance, especially your smile, you risked drifting toward practicing. But bad breath during prayer, also not ideal, so the balance was delicate. You could clean your mouth, but you better not enjoy it too much. In some writings from the period, saints were praised for their indifference to bodily decay. One famous story involves a holy woman whose tooth rotted so badly it fell out while she fasted, and she celebrated it as a sign of humility. Another supposedly pulled out her own tooth to avoid temptation, though most scholars think that's more parable than biography. Still, the point was made. Holiness didn't require teeth. You pass through the cloisters, where the sun filters through archways and sparrows argue noisily in the rafters. A monk kneels nearby, scrubbing the stone with water and sage. You ask if it's for purification. He shakes his head, no. The novices keep spitting out their rinse water here. Fair enough. In the chapel, the incense is strong, and the chanting echoes in a way that rattles your bones. You can't help but think, in a world where silence was golden and prayer was breath, the mouth had weight beyond words. To keep it clean was to keep the soul tidy, or at least less embarrassing. You remember reading that in some abbeys, monks were punished for speaking during cleaning routines, not because it was unsanitary, but because it distracted others from their sacred focus. Tooth care, oddly, became part of spiritual discipline. You didn't just brush to stay healthy. You brushed to be humble. You sit beneath a tree in the garden as evening settles, the herbs round you swaying in the breeze. Somewhere, bells mark the hour of vespers. You rub a sage leaf between your fingers and wonder how many prayers it's absorbed over the years. And in that moment, you realize, in the monastery, the mouth wasn't just for eating or smelling. It was a vessel for words, for suffering, and for grace. You rise with the sun again, your breath fogging slightly in the cool morning air. Another medieval dawn, another reminder from your tongue that toothpaste is still centuries away. You roll a mint leaf in your mouth, partially for the flavor, partially for the ritual. And as you pass the edge of the monastery garden, you decide it's time to leave behind the cloistered calm of sacred hygiene. Today, you seek something far more chaotic. A commotion pulls you toward the market square. Laughter, drums, a faint metallic clang. You round the corner to find a crowd gathered round a colorful wagon covered in ribbons, sacks, and what appears to be a stuffed goat hanging from the side. A traveling dentist has arrived, though no one calls him that. They call him a tooth man, a healer, a miracle hawker. Depends who's asking. He wears a feathered cap and a beard that seems glued on. His breath smells like onion meat and reckless confidence. Come closer, he shouts, for pain of the tooth, for stink of the breath, for rot and worms and wicked humors I have your cure. He jingles a pouch of coins, but not for free. The crowd presses in, eager for drama. A woman volunteers. She's older, clutching her jaw and swearing softly under her breath. The tooth man produces an iron hook, a small wooden hammer, and what looks suspiciously like a spoon that's seen better days. Historians still argue whether traveling dentists like this were heroes or hustlers. Some carried real knowledge, picked up in distant cities or stolen from monastery books. Others made it up as they went, offering powdered chalk, licorice root, or boiled frog hearts. The line between medicine and performance was thin, and most people didn't care as long as the pain stopped. The man offers the woman a swig of something brown. Liquid courage, he says. She downs it in one gulp and immediately starts singing. He places her head against a wooden post, holds her jaw with one hand, and with the other, twists the tool into her mouth. There's a crunch, a wail, a sudden pop, and out comes a blackened molar, gleaming at the root like a goblin's tooth. The crowd erupts. Someone throws a coin. Someone else faints. The woman takes another swig of courage, and still crying hugs the tooth man. He bows deeply, then turns to sell his miracle powder. You catch a whiff of it. Cloves, ash, ground mustard seed, and something bitter you can't quite place. It smells like medieval ambition. You step away as the next patient steps forward, a shepherd boy with swollen gums and terror in his eyes. In a quieter corner of the market, you find another kind of tooth merchant. She's not loud, not theatrical. Her wares are laid out carefully on a cloth. Dried herbs, small vials of oil, thin sticks wrapped in linen, and toothpicks carved from cherry wood. You sit beside her, ask about her methods. She tells you stories of travelers who carried whole pouches of powdered fennel and chalk, of sea captains who swore by rinsing with salt water and orange peel, of midwives who used parsley juice on teething infants, both to numb and to bless. She opens a tiny box and shows you a scroll no wider than your finger. It lists remedies in Latin and French, each line beginning with a cross symbol. You notice one for a breath like the devil's socks, a mixture of vinegar, thyme, and ground cinnamon bark. Another claims to close the gums like a sealed gate, using crushed fig and wine. Fringe recipes, yes, but they tell a story. People tried, they experimented, they cared, even when they didn't understand infection or acid or enamel. They knew something was wrong and sought to fix it. A group of children gather nearby, gnawing on chew sticks and daring each other to lick the miracle powder. One girl screams theatrically and falls over. The others applaud. You chuckle, then notice something odd. A man near the edge of the square sits quietly, pulling out what appears to be a book. Not a monk, not a noble, a merchant, maybe. He flips to a page and rubs a finger along a diagram of a human skull. He is studying, learning. You edge closer. He tells you he's been to Italy, where scholars are writing new ideas about health, humors, balance, even rudimentary anatomy. He's heard whispers of physicians who boil instruments, who clean wounds, who scrape teeth with copper loops and rinse with rosemary spirit. He leans in and lowers his voice. There's a man in Paris, he says, who thinks teeth decay not from worms, but from invisible life. You blink. Life. He nods. Tiny things. Too small to see. But they rot us from within. It's absurd. Revolutionary. Almost heretical. And it sounds a whole lot like bacteria. Historians today know that the idea of invisible creatures causing illness didn't take hold until centuries later. But even in the Middle Ages, a few thinkers guessed correctly. They lacked proof, but they saw the pattern. Rot spreads, it grows, it moves, and it needs to be stopped. The merchant returns to his book. You return to your mint leaf. You walk slowly through the crowd again, past the powdered miracle man, the herb vendor, the children with black tongues, and the quiet scholar with his too modern thoughts. The air is thick with noise and the sweet, strange scent of hope disguised as spice. You head home under a sky turning from gold to copper. Your pouch is full. A chew stick, a clove or two, a scrap of linen soaked in mint oil. Your teeth are no whiter, but they feel stronger, smarter, better understood, because today you saw something rare. Not just pain or ritual or performance, but curiosity. And in a world where frogs are bitten, worms are blamed, and vinegar is currency, that curiosity might just be the cleanest thing of all. The town feels quieter today. It's not silence exactly, there's still the usual shouts, chickens, the soft clink of buckets at the well, but something's different. Slower, you step outside and realize the fair is over, the performer's gone, and the square is scattered with wilted herbs, torn fabric, and one chew stick stuck upright in the mud like a tiny, fibrous flag. You pluck it from the ground and pocket it. Might be useful. Today, you're after the truth, not the powdered clove showmanship or monastic modesty. You want the hard evidence. So you go where all the secrets eventually surface, quite literally. You head to the graveyard. It's not as morbid as it sounds. Okay, it's a little morbid. But today, you've arranged to meet with a grave digger who, in his spare time, moonlights as a sort of amateur bone scholar. Let's call him medieval Europe's version of a forensic enthusiast. He greets you with a smile, revealing teeth that seem to be playing hide-and-seek with his gums. He carries a short shovel, a pouch of herbs for the smell, and a reverence for bones that borders on poetic. We dig carefully, he says. The bones have stories, and he's not wrong. Historians and archaeologists have learned a surprising amount about medieval dental health from skeletons. Tooth wear, abscesses, cavities, jaw infections, they all leave traces. The dead don't lie, especially not about how bad things really were. He pulls back a loose cloth over a shallow pit, revealing part of a skull. The jaw is exposed, and the teeth, what's left of them, are worn almost flat. Not chipped, not decayed, just used, hard grain, he says. Stone ground, got grit in every bite. Indeed, one of the quirks of medieval life was the bread itself. Ground between stones, flour often carried tiny bits of grit and sand. So even if you weren't eating sugar, your teeth were being sandblasted every day by your daily bread. Holy Communion with a side of dental erosion. He gestures to another set of remains, a younger skull. This one with several teeth missing, but the sockets healed. She lost them young, he says, tapping gently. But she lived, gums healed, chewed on the other side, probably. You stare at the socket, the evidence of life after loss. It's sobering. And then he brings out his little treasure box. Teeth. Loose ones, found in graves, lost in time. He lines them up like relics. Some are black at the root, some cracked in half. A few are stained in ways you can't identify, and one has a small hole in the side, a likely abscess channel. A fringe fact for the day. In some burial sites, bodies have been found with herbs wrapped round their jaws. Not for preservation, for ritual. A clove placed in the mouth. Sage tied round the head. Some scholars believe it was for odor control. Others for spiritual cleansing, so the spirit didn't carry rot into the afterlife. You ask about gold teeth. false teeth. He shakes his head. Not here. Poor folk. Real teeth, if they had them. Gums, if they didn't. In the wealthier graves. Different story. Records from monastic crypts and noble tombs show signs of dental intervention, abscess, drainage holes, prosthetic pins, even wiring. Primitive, yes, but proof that someone tried to help, tried to fix. And if that's not dentistry, what is? He hands you a tooth, smooth, yellowed, and surprisingly light. Hold that, he says. It chewed its last turnip 600 years ago. You do, and you think. This tooth was part of someone's smile, someone's meal, maybe someone's last words. Now, it's history in your palm. Historians still argue what all this evidence means. Some claim medieval people had better teeth than today, thanks to their sugar-free diets. Others point to the sheer number of abscesses, infections, and tooth loss as proof of disaster. But maybe the truth lies somewhere between. They didn't have floss or Florimid, but they had tough food, strong habits, and most importantly, a will to keep their teeth however they could. You sit with the gravedigger as he chews on a licorice root and tells stories of skulls with gold inlays, jawbones so thin you could crack them with a glance, and once a skeleton with an iron nail driven into a tooth to kill the worm. He says, you grimace, but you believe him. As you walk away from the graveyard, the tooth still in your palm, the breeze picks up. The town is fading into late afternoon, and you feel like you've touched something ancient, not just bone, but effort. People fought to eat, to talk, to kiss, to pray with whatever teeth they had left. You pass a child chasing a goose, both honking in fury. You see a baker handing out warm bread, still dusted with flour that will grind away at molars. And you see a woman rubbing her teeth with a wet cloth behind her stall. Hidden from view, teeth were always more than just tools. They were identity, survival, pride, and pain. And even in death, they told the truth. You put the old tooth back in the box and nod to the digger. Because the story continues. The wind carries the smell of evening fires and the faint aroma of damp earth as you make your way back from the graveyard. That tooth, still warm from your palm, maybe 600 years old. But it's changed the way you see every smile in this town. Now, when someone grins wide and crooked, you wonder, how many of those teeth are real? How many are borrowed, blessed, or battle-scarred? You pass the town square again, quieter now. The market stalls mostly folded, the last few vendors muttering to each other as they pack away bundles of dried sage and linen. One of them offers you a nod and a sprig of mint, more habit than hospitality. Tonight, your attention turns inward, not just to the teeth themselves, but to what happens around them, to the systems, the customs, the rituals that orbited the simple, painful act of living with a medieval mouth. Because what happens when even teeth lose importance? When the world turns upside down. As you settle on a bench outside the alehouse, you hear whispers of illness, faint but urgent. Someone in the next town has died of the swelling. Another's tongue turned black. Another's breath reeked like rotting onions before they collapsed in the field. You've heard this before. You know where this is going. The Black Death, the plague, and suddenly, your gums are no longer the biggest problem in your life. Historians still debate just how much the plague altered hygiene habits. Some argue it pushed people away from personal care, believing that water and bathing opened the skin to disease. Others suggest the Hall of Death prompted an obsession with cleansing the body, as if scrubbing could hold back the dark. But one thing is certain, the plague changed priorities. You could have perfectly clean teeth and still die within hours. You walk toward the town well and see a monk sprinkling herbs into the water. He says they're protective: rosemary, thyme, lavender. He doesn't know if it works, but doing something feels better than doing nothing. A mother nearby rubs her child's gums with a clove dipped in vinegar, not for dental pain, but because she's heard it might ward off the Black Breath. The idea that plague traveled through foul smells was widespread. Bad air was feared. So was bad breath. You think back to everything you've learned. Shrubs, mint rinses, chew sticks, saints and scrolls and soot. All of it suddenly feels fragile. Beautiful, but fragile. Like a reed against a storm. You hear from a peddler that in cities now overwhelmed by plague, barbers and surgeons are refusing to treat infected mouths. Too close, they say. The death rides on the tongue. A fringe report. Some healers began wearing waxed masks stuffed with herbs predecessors to the later plague doctor mask. Not always for fashion, but because working on mouths pulling teeth, draining abscesses meant inhaling too close to someone else's rot. And rot, they believed, was death's first breath. The monks begin a slow procession through town, swinging censers that billow clouds of incense. It smells of frankincense and damp wool. You watch as villagers step aside, bowing their heads. And then, quietly, a figure steps from a shadow near the chapel. He's thin, wrapped in dark cloth, and clutches a pouch. You watch him approach the well and kneel, not to drink but to drop something in. A tooth wrapped in linen. A prayer, maybe. A sacrifice. A token. You don't ask. He doesn't look up. And you realize that in times like this, teeth are more than tools. They're symbols of survival, of health, of what we're terrified to lose. You sit with that thought as the sky deepens, the stars crawling out one by one. You pull out your own little mint pouch, chew slowly, and breathe through your nose. Clean, herbal, safe, at least for tonight. You remember another story, one about a village that began burning teeth. Not just loose ones, but those extracted from the dead. Don't let their decay spread. Someone had said, it wasn't medical, it was spiritual, a kind of dental exorcism. Another record mentions burying a rotten tooth beneath a pear tree, in hopes the sweetness of the fruit would cancel the bitterness of the mouth it came from. It didn't work, but the tree grew beautifully. Historians still puzzle over whether these acts were superstition, faith, or desperation. But to the people doing them, they were defense. Against pain, against rot, against the invisible one, or the devil's breath, or the plague's creeping hand. You stretch, sigh, and rise from the bench. Your jaw feels tight again, not from chewing but from thought. Because tonight, as disease whispers through alleys and fear grows heavier than vinegar breath, oral hygiene is no longer just about comfort. It's about control, a tiny act of defiance, a way to say, I may not survive, but I won't go foul-mouthed. And somehow, that matters. You return to your sleeping mat, rinse your mouth with warm wine, and tuck your chew stick beside you like a friend. The moonlight spills across the floorboards like milk, and tomorrow if you wake you'll scrape, chew, rinse, and bless your teeth once more. Because in the Middle Ages, even the smallest rituals became shields. The night is quiet. Too quiet. You lie in your straw bedding, chew stick resting under your hand like a talisman. Your mouth tingles faintly from the last rinse of mint and wine. The flavors linger earthy, sharp, soothing in their own strange way. You scrubbed, rinsed, chewed, gagged, and prayed your way through nearly every oral ritual the medieval world has to offer. And now, there's one more piece to settle. One final truth that ties all of this together. You step outside, the moon hanging low and yellow in the sky, like a crooked lantern forgotten by some celestial wanderer. A chill bites at your fingers. You wrap your cloak tighter. Tonight, you're going to talk to someone who's seen more mouths than anyone. Not a monk, not a barber, not a grave digger, a midwife. Because oral hygiene didn't start or end with illness. It began at birth, and in many ways, it ended in the hands of women. You knock gently on the wooden door of a house at the village edge. A candle flickers inside. The door creaks open, and a woman peers out, her face lined, her eyes sharp. She nods once and lets you in. The home smells of rosemary, smoke, and iron. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of herbs, dried roots, strips of cloth, and strange little amulets made from braided string and polished stones. On the table lies a ledger, pages filled with notches and quick notes in a neat, practiced hand. She pours you a cup of warm broth. It tastes like fennel and something medicinal. You sip in silence, then ask the question you came here for. What did people do before they had anything? She smiles slowly. Babies, she begins, were given clean cloth to suck, sometimes dipped in honey water, sometimes nothing at all. We watched the gums, felt for the heat, and when teething began, she'd slice a fresh root off and licorice or valerian and let the child chew. Or we gave them small bones to gnaw, she adds, flat ones, washed, blessed, if we remembered. She lifts a satchel from beneath the table and pulls out a bundle. Inside are the tools of a village midwife. Worn cloths, stitched pouches, a small silver spoon, and curiously a soft horsehair brush tied to a thin wooden handle. To clean the mouths of the dying, she says. You pause. Dirt clings to the lips when they stop eating, she explains. So does sin, if you believe the old women. We clean them, offer a last rinse. You stare at the brush. It's not just for them, she adds. It's for the living. So the last image you see is soft, whole, a fringe detail. Yes, but one rooted in real practice. In some regions, especially in Central Europe, the mouths of the dying were wiped clean as part of last rites. Not always for health, for grace, for farewell. She offers you the brush to feel. The bristles are fine, soft like river reeds, gentle enough to bless. You nod and hand it back. She tells you stories of women who chewed bitter herbs to keep their teeth during pregnancy, of old men who rubbed garlic on their gums to keep death out of the roots, of brides who spent hours on wedding mornings brushing with salt and ash, so their first kiss wouldn't sour the marriage. And, yes, of rituals, a mother rubbing her own tooth with wine before letting a newborn suckle, passing on both sustenance and a little superstition. Protection, maybe. You realize something simple and profound. For the people of the Middle Ages, the mouth wasn't just a biological tool. It was where the world entered, and where the soul peeked out. She walks you to the door as the candle gutters low. Outside, the first bird begins to chirp. You've got good teeth, she says softly. For someone so curious, you smile, quietly proud. You walk home as dawn stretches long shadows across the road. Your feet crunch softly, the air fresh and cold. And now, your journey is complete. You've seen the chew sticks, the soot scrubs, the golden smiles of nobles, and the gummy laughter of peasants. You've watched monks cleanse in silence and quacks chant to worms. You've sniffed vinegar, chewed bark, and held a 600-year-old tooth in your palm. And through it all, you've learned that hygiene, especially oral hygiene, was never just about health. It was about humanity, a daily act of resilience, a way to hold on to dignity in a world that rarely gave it freely. And now, your eyes grow heavy. So let's slow down. Let your body soften. Let the shadows fall away. Breathe deeply, through a mouth that's cleaner than when you arrived. Feel the weight of centuries drift off your shoulders. You've traveled far tonight across time, between teeth, through soot and scrolls and silence. The fire crackles low, the stars blink above. You lay back on your mat, and with one final breath of mint and memory, you sleep. And now, let it all settle. Let the voices fade, the laughing barbers, the chanting monks, the whispering apothecaries. Let them slip gently into silence, like dust caught in a shaft of moonlight. You're here now, not in a stone-walled cottage, not in a market square, just here, in the stillness. The world round you softens. The grindstone stops turning. The chew stick is laid to rest. The hearth fire crackles low, and even the goat has stopped its evening protest. You've wandered through centuries of breath and bone, witnessed the struggle for something as simple and as sacred as a clean smile. You've seen how people held fast to ritual, even when it was bitter, or burning, or absurd. Because in those little daily gestures, chewing mint, rinsing with wine, brushing with sage, there was hope. Hope that pain could pass, that dignity could be preserved, that even in a world of cold floors and crooked teeth, something soft could survive. And that hope, you carry it now. Breathe into that warmth. Let it rise through your chest like morning sun behind monastery walls. No pressure, no urgency, just breath, slow and smooth. You're safe here, far from hooks and soot and superstition. And your mouth. You're brave, aching, miraculous mouth. Let it rest too. Soften your jaw, part your lips. Let the story go quiet. You've done enough. Sleep well.